All right, let's jump right in. Today we're talking about something called KickLang. It's a special kind of scripting language, and its whole goal is to take this super powerful data tool, the knowledge graph, and make it way easier for anyone to build and use.
But before we get into the weeds, let's just step back and ask a really basic question. Think about it for a second. How do you actually code for complex, real-world relationships? I'm talking about things like your LinkedIn network, or a company's supply chain, or even just a simple family tree. They're all about connections, right? But how do you translate all that messy, interconnected stuff into something a computer can actually work with? It's a lot harder than it sounds.
So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the big challenge with knowledge graphs. Then, we'll break down KickLang into its basic building blocks. After that, we'll see how you actually bring a graph to life with real data. And then, the fun part, how to ask it questions. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about why all this simplicity is such a game changer. All right, first up, the knowledge graph challenge. Basically, this is all about how tricky it is to make sense of data that's all tangled up and connected.
You know, knowledge graphs are awesome. I mean, they're the magic behind stuff like Google search results and Netflix recommendations. But here's the catch. Actually building and managing one can be a real headache. You often have to fight with these super complex query languages and configurations. You end up spending more time just trying to get the syntax right than you do on the thing you actually care about, modeling the connections in your data.
And that is exactly where KickLang comes in with its building blocks. Seriously, the best way to think about it is like they're Legos, but for your data.
So your first Lego piece is called a node. And a node is just a thing, an object, an entity. That's it. A person, that's a node. A company, that's a node. A city, a product, whatever. If it's a thing in your data, it's a node. Okay, so you've got your things, your nodes. What's next? The second piece is the edge. And the edge is just the relationship, the connection between the nodes. It's the link that ties them together. So a person, that's a node, works at a company, another node. That works at part, that's the edge.
And here's a really cool way to think about it. If your nodes are the nouns in your data story, then the edges are the verbs. It's that simple. And look how clean the KickLang code is. Def node person. That's your noun. Def edge works at, there's your verb. It just makes sense, right?
But of course, our things need some details. You can't just have a person with no name. So in KickLang, you just defined properties for your nodes. For a person, you might add a name, which is a string, and an age, which is a number. For a company, you'd have a name and maybe an industry. It's just a super simple and readable way to flesh out your data structure.
And this is a really important point. Edges can have properties too. The relationship itself can hold data. It's not just a dumb line connecting 2 points. That works at edge between a person and a company, you can store stuff on it, like their start date or their job role. This adds this whole other layer of rich context to your graph.
Okay, so we've defined the blueprint, right? We've got our nodes and edges. Now it's time to actually bring this graph to life. We need to put data in it and manage it. And if you've done any programming, you'll recognize the good old CRUD operations. Create, read, update, and delete.
And this is where KickLang just shines. It boils all that data management down to 4 really simple, logical sets of commands. You use one set to create nodes and edges, another to read them and see what you've got, one to update them with new info, and one to delete them. That's it. These simple commands are literally all you need to handle the whole life cycle of your data.
All right, you've built the structure, you've populated it with data. Now comes the best part. The whole reason we did all this in the first place. Asking your data interesting questions and getting some really cool insights back.
So how do you actually ask questions of this complex web of data? Well, in KickLang, it pretty much all comes down to this one beautiful function, match. All you have to do is give it a simple pattern written as a string that kind of looks like the graph you're describing. Something like person-works-at-company. It's this incredibly intuitive way to describe the relationships you want to find. All that power packed into a single command.
Okay, let's pull back and look at the big picture. Why does any of this simplicity actually matter? What's the point?
When you really think about it, the advantages are just so clear. KickLang is a language designed for one job and one job only, working with graphs. It makes you separate the structure, your nodes and edges, from the actions, your functions. It takes really complex operations and hides them behind simple commands. And maybe the biggest thing is,
It makes querying your connected data feel, well, just natural.
And at the end of the day, that's the real takeaway here. Technology is always at its best when more people can actually use it. By stripping away all the unnecessary complexity and focusing on a clean, easy-to-read syntax, KickLang takes this incredibly powerful technology, knowledge graphs, and puts it into the hands of way more people. More developers, more data scientists, more analysts, everyone.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Just imagine, if the barrier to building these things was this low, if the language for describing complex connections was this simple, what kind of new patterns, what kind of new insights, what knowledge could you unlock from your own data?